For a few moments this evening, I want to continue in our series of messages entitled, You Can Be a Victorious Overcomer. This is part 4. This is the last part of the series of the Protege Project. And next week we'll begin on another section of the Protege Project. And by the way of review, up to this point in the series of messages on being an overcomer, we've shared with you that you can overcome anything through your relationship with Jesus Christ, who said to his disciples, as recorded in John the 16th chapter, verse 33, in this world you will have tribulation, but be of a good cheer, for I have overcome the world. The question is asked, what is it that we need to overcome? Well, one likely answer is the depravity of our hearts. Jeremiah wrote, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? When it comes to the depravity of the heart, the Apostle Paul refers to the work of the flesh in Galatians the 5th chapter, verses 16 through 21, as something we can overcome through the Spirit of God and the fruit of the Spirit as it expresses itself in our lives. Galatians the 5th chapter, verses 22 and 23. Another thing that we need to overcome, and watch this, it is our complicity with acts of injustice. Let me say that again. Our complicity with acts of injustice. Well, what do you mean? I'm not an unjust person. I try to do justly in all my ways. When I say complicit in acts of injustice, I am talking about how we render ourselves and our service to the Lord. In other words, we can be in an environment where there are unjust things going on, and we may say nothing. We may do nothing. We might talk about it on the phone. We might complain about it. But where there is injustice, where things are out of whack with the will of God and the love of God, we are to be reconcilers. We are to speak out in love. We are to be light in darkness. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means different things to different people. But we must not be complicit in things that are unjust in this world by saying nothing and doing nothing. Even if you sit down and write a journal and write the things that are in your heart as a prayer to God, at least you're doing something. You speak to people, you give them an encouraging word. When they speak of hopelessness because of injustice all around and injustice everywhere, try to find a way to lift up their spirits by speaking about the goodness of God and what he has done in spite of injustice. We might not be able to see everything that we want to see in terms of justice being done, but we are complicit when we do not say that God is in charge. And if you open your eyes and you use faith imagination, and if you pray, and if you reach out to others and listen, you will know that God is doing what God said he would do. It might not be the way you expect it, but God is a just God, and we just have to believe that. The other way that we are complicit is when we don't, in our own lives, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before God. The question was asked, what doth the Lord require of us in Micah the 6th chapter? And the response was, he has showed thee, O man, what is good, to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. We can complain about all of the problems that are around us, but if each and every one of us, as proteges of Jesus, will commit to doing justice, loving mercy and walking humbly before God where we are in our sphere of influence with the people around us, our family, our loved ones and friends, and let them know that we are standing up. We are encouraging. We believe to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. We're not that complicit. We can't do everything. People have different callings to deal with justice issues, but we sure can pray. We sure can write. We sure can speak up for justice, mercy, and righteousness and make sure that we live it ourselves. That's another way of overcoming the complicity with the acts of justice. And then when it comes to the random acts of nature, the winds blow, tornadoes come, earthquakes come, cancer comes, sickness comes, death comes. All of these things that come that are no fault of yours, but they happen to you. They happen to your loved ones. They happen to your friends. And you have a hard time you have a hard time overcoming your feelings and your depression and your doubt. So many times people are misled by people who say, God is going to answer your prayer, and they expect God to answer their prayer the way they want God to answer their prayer, and God answers their prayer in a way that they don't like, in a way that's disappointing, in a way that may even be painful to them. You want God to answer your prayer, God will answer your prayer, but he will do it on his own terms. And we have to learn to overcome our grief and our anger. So many people are angry with God because something happened in their life that was out of their control, and they're angry with God. But I want you to understand, my brothers and sisters, when these things come, God is in control. He is in charge. And instead of staying in a pity party, instead of saying angry, it's one thing to grieve, but you don't have to live in grief all your life. You can just trust God and know that he makes no mistake and strive to overcome the struggle you're going through. How do you overcome? You may have to spend time with others who have faith and have confidence in God that can pray with you and encourage you. Get alone with God and pray. God, I don't understand why this is happening. I just have a problem with you, God. God, speak to my heart and help me to overcome my situation. I don't know why my baby died at such a young age. I don't understand why I've given my life to my mate, my spouse, and they just have done me so wrong. I don't understand why when I asked you to do something for me and you did not do it. I don't understand why, Lord. Help me, oh God, to overcome. And then, when you commit yourself to God earnestly and speak to him and are willing to stand still and listen to what God has to say, he will speak peace to your heart. Now, tonight, I want to tell you about the journey to becoming a victorious overcomer. And I want to say to you that the journey of becoming a victorious overcomer has no specific end date. It has a starting date, but it doesn't have a specific ending date. And it's all about a journey of grace, a journey of grace. And to explain what I'm talking about, I want you to consider with me the story of the prodigal son and the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was on a rampage to destroy Christianity because he thought that Christians were antithetical to the Jewish faith. he felt that he had to defend the Christian faith by doing whatever he needed to do by any means necessary. The prodigal son, on the other hand, he went to his father and said, no, he went to his father and demanded to receive his inheritance from his father right now. In effect, what the prodigal son was saying was, you're dead to me, because we only receive an inheritance after someone dies. And so if you ask them or demand your inheritance, for all you care, they could be dead. And then he took his inheritance and he went off to be a friend to the world. You remember I told you being a friend to the world is enmity to God. He went off to be a friend to the world. The Bible reveals that to us because he spent his money all kind of wild ways and ended up with nothing and feeding the pigs. In both cases, the heart of Saul and the heart of the prodigal son were deprived and misguided. And they had a misguided understanding about life and searching perhaps for the wrong things in the wrong places. That's what they were doing. In both cases, God made himself known to them. The prodigal in a pigsty had an epiphany. I can go back home to my father and be humble myself. And the Apostle Paul, he had his epiphany when he was blinded by the light and had an encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. And when the Lord began to question him, he said, "Yes, Lord." They were able to hear God and open their hearts to God while they were living in a depraved state of existence. In other words, God's grace was so off the chain that while they was cutting up and not even thinking about what God wanted, what was right, what was just, God made a way of speaking to them. We read it in the parable of the prodigal son. We see it in the life of Saul before he became Paul. God's grace is so sufficient in both cases that their souls, their hearts were not so deprived and so hard that they could not receive what God gave them. John Wesley calls that prevenient grace. God, thank you for prevenient grace, because there was a time when we was out there doing our own thing, carrying on the way we wanted to, paying no attention to God. But because of his prevenient grace, he pricked our hearts. He pricked our minds. He pricked our souls some kind of way. Everybody got a different story. Everybody got their own transformation, their own salvation, their own conversion story. But they were converted. Lord, thank you that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We didn't even know about it, but we found out later Christ died for us. Thank you, Lord, for that. That's the first step. The second step is the fact that when the prodigal got home, his father saw him coming from a distance and began to celebrate the fact that his son was coming home. You know the story, how he gave him a ring and had a fatted calf slaughtered for him, gave him sandals and a robe, and celebrated his son who had been lost but now had been found. In the case of the Apostle Paul, when he had his encounter with Jesus, and Jesus asked him some specific questions, and then the Lord told Saul what he wanted him to do. And Saul said, "Yes, Lord, I'll do it." That's justification. That's justification of grace. When we have fouled up so much, and then God has mercy and forgives us and gives us new life. God will forgive us. He will justify us. And then here's the third stage. The third stage that we talked about, prevenient grace, justifying grace. But watch this. I'm going to talk about sanctifying grace. Sanctifying grace is where the overcoming really takes place. You've experienced the grace of God to save you. You've experienced the grace of God to accept you and to give you purpose and to use you. But sanctifying grace is when we actually grow up and mature in the faith. And the interesting thing is that sometimes people have been in the church all their lives. Elaine and I can tell you about folk in churches we've been that are just as childish at the age of 75, 80 and on than some who are just in their teens in terms of being mature in the faith. But we have to grow up in the faith. And when we grow up in the faith, we begin to learn how to overcome, how to be victorious. Now, it doesn't say it, but I believe that when it comes to talking about the sanctification process of the prodigal son, I think it would be fair to say that he had an envious brother, an envious elder brother, who was very disappointed in the fact that he came home and his father blessed him the way he did. And the story ends with the young man having a conversation with his father, but he is still bitter. And if he's still bitter, his baby brother, the prodigal son, if he was going to grow in the faith and mature in the faith, he had to learn how to deal with his elder brother. How many times in our sanctification process have we come up against obstacles and struggles with people and institutions and even with ourselves, and we have to overcome, and we have to keep on working at getting along. We have to keep on working at overcoming the issues in our lives. We have to keep on overcoming our feelings and attitudes about the negativity that's all around us, instead of being consumed by it, instead of staying lost, instead of not growing. We must press on and overcome. The Apostle Paul said yes to the Lord, and they kept on in the name of the Lord. Here's the interesting thing about the Apostle Paul. When the Apostle Paul said yes to the Lord said to Ananias, "Don't worry about Paul. I got things for him to do." And he acknowledged that Paul would have to go through some difficult times. And throughout the ministry of Paul, he'll talk about his issues and his struggles with himself and with people. He'll talk about his shipwreck. He'll talk about how the devil buffeted him. He talks in his letters about the problems that he was confronted with the church at Corinth and the other churches that wanted to rebel against his teachings. But he kept pressing on, trusting in God, growing in sanctification, teaching, and being an overcomer himself. Listen to what he told his protege Timothy towards the end of his life. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 5 to 8. This is what he said. "But watch thou in all things, enduring afflictions. Do the work of an evangelist and make full proof of thy ministry. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. But I fought a good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. And henceforth laid up for me is a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me that day. And not only me, but unto all them also that love his appearing. That's you and I. That's all who faithfully hang in there and overcome. Now, let me say this to you. We know that the Apostle Paul wasn't a perfect person, just like everybody else. Because he talked about when I want to do good, evil is with me. And, the devil buffeted me, and I got this thorn in my flesh. What's the thorn in your flesh? The thorn in my flesh is sometimes I might just want to just get real angry and go off. But I have to overcome that and keep my calm and keep my cool, and not lash back. One of the easiest ways that I used to lash back is when somebody would honk a horn at me. And I hate that. I hate it now. But I've learned, Elaine will tell you, I've learned to keep my mouth shut, and I'm getting better at controlling my thoughts when it happens, And we have to overcome these things. Now, does it mean that we will reach perfection in this life? No. But as long as we keep on striving and growing and working and not giving up, we are victorious overcomers. When we put our trust in God and say, Lord, I give myself away to you. Whatever the struggle is, when we put God above our struggle, we are victorious overcomers. This is the word of God for the people of God. Won't you lift your hands in the house and lift your hands in social media and say, thanks be to God.